there, it's Natasha, and thank you so much for joining me today. So my goal today is to show you 4 different ways to step up your stenciling. So we are going to go from basic to a little bit more involved. To keep it nice and even, I'm going to use the exact same stencil for every single version, and I'm also going to use pretty much the same colors so that you can get a really good comparison between what's happening. So to start off with, this is the Spiced Marmalade Distress Oxide color, and I am using a domed blending tool to apply the ink on, but there are lots of ways that you can add the ink on. You can just add makeup brushes, you can just have little cotton balls or ink blending brushes. There are heaps and heaps of different ways out there to apply the ink, but this is the most basic, and you just use the stencil as it is, and I'm just popping this down onto some plain white paper. Now, the one thing that does frustrate me about the Tim Holtz stencils is that they do not reach right across your page. I don't understand why that is, why they do that. It's very frustrating to me as a card maker. But anyway, we are going to move on to our second kind of technique with the stencils. Now for this one, I am actually going to use some low tack tape. This is the mint tape from scrapbook.com, and I will link anything that is still available down in the description box below. But first of all, here I am adding some mustard seed distress oxide ink, just exactly like you would any other stencil, filling in all the holes. And then all I'm going to do here is take off the stencil and then add it and shift it a little bit to the right and up. So you can see there that there's a little bit of white exposed, and this works, by the way, all of these techniques work for all types of stencils. Definitely do not have to have this kind of stencil or this brand or this pattern or this design. Any stencils you are able to do these techniques with. So then I'm coming back in with the Spiced Marmalade color, so the orange color, and I'm going over the stencil as is again. Now there are lots and lots of different stencil techniques out here, but this is just 4 that you can kind of keep stepping it up and stepping it up to get some different looks in your card making. So here this creates a shadow. It almost looks a little bit 3D-ish. It's a little bit tricky on the eyes, but it's nice for something a little bit different, and just gives it a little bit more dimension. You can see here, this is the first one that we did on the right with just the plain stenciling, and then this is the one on the left that we shifted the stencil just slightly and re-stenciled over top. Now for the third technique, and we are going to do something to the paper first before we get to stenciling, and this is just creating a little bit of a light background for our stenciling. So all I'm going to do, I have put down a little non-stick mat, and I'm using some worn lipstick, which is just a pink Distress Oxide color. I'm adding a little bit of water, and this is a sheet of watercolor paper. This is the Tim Holtz watercolor paper, which is definitely my favorite by far. I use this for everything watercolor, and I am going to pick up some of that ink off my mat. This is like ink smushing. Then I'm going to dry it with my heat tool, and then there's still ink left on the mat, and Distress Oxide inks layer up really well. So once this is dry, I can get some really good texture on the back here, and I'm going to re-dip this back into that ink, and it will give me lots of splotches and things as well. Now if you didn't want to do this, you could do lots of different other techniques, or you could start off with a piece of pattern paper underneath, just a really nice light pattern so it kind of doesn't overtake your stenciling, but just another way to add a little bit more dimension. Now again, we're going to do the same thing and add in the mustard seed color first of all, and you can just see that kind of nice pink in the background, and because it's not a super dark pink color, then I am able to kind of add the light yellow over top, and it still doesn't take away from the pattern of the stencil. So then I'm going to do the shifting technique and move it over just a little bit and add the orange on top. Now for this video today, it got really long, so I'm going to cut it into 2 parts where I show you the 4 techniques here in the first video, and then I'm going to turn them into cards in the second part that I will release after this one. So that just means that this video doesn't get super long. So then you can see here that this nice pink in the background has just added an extra little bit of dimension and interest. And I'm going to show you in a couple of my cards that I make in the following video just how that can make a bit of a difference. So especially when you put it side by side to the one that we did before, it creates a nice little background effect. Now here I'm going to do the ink smushing technique with the mustard seed yellow colour, and we're kind of going to go in a different direction with this stencil. I am doing the same thing as before, smushing my paper down onto the ink, my watercolor paper, then I'm going to dry it and then I'm going to re-dip it back in, because even though I'm not using a really dark color here, I still want to get lots of the color on, and I want to achieve lots of texture with all those little drips and little puddles drying and things like that. So that's what I'm going for here in the background. It doesn't matter to me that there is some white space. I quite like that look as well. Again, it just all adds a little bit of interest rather than it just being a flat color in the background. You can definitely do a flat color as well if that's not your type of thing to kind of go in with the watercolors, but either will work perfectly. Again, we have the same stencil. This is the lace, it's called Lace from Tim Holtz, but as I said, any stencils for any of these techniques works perfectly. Now here I'm going to bring in some light and fluffy modelling paste. There are lots of great modelling pastes out there, texture paste, stencil pastes. They are all very, very similar with little different things about them, but I like getting a really nice white, light and fluffy one. This one works really well. Then I'm going to add down some spiced marmalade, and I actually use some ripe persimmon as well. So I put that down on my non-stick mat, and then I'm using that ink smushing to colour my texture paste. Now I'm mixing a couple of different inks together here because I wanted to get a kind of nice peachy orangey kind of look, and that has worked really well. So once I've gathered up all that ink off the sheet, I'm going to move all the paste into the middle so that I am able to stencil it onto my background. So again, I'm just going to use the same stencil, pop it down. You can definitely adhere this down with some low-tack tape if you want to. But here is where I thought I would do the same technique as before. I thought I was just going to stencil this on nice and plain, but I'm taking the same mustard seed color, which is the exact same color that we put on the background here. But this time I'm going to apply it with the domed foam applicator. And I'm going to put it through the stencil, and then I'm going to do the shifter technique where I shift it a little bit up and to the right as well. I thought it would just be really fun for comparison's sake because we have done that to 3 of them in the video now, and it's really nice to see similar techniques but just stepped up ever so slightly. So even though we use the same colors there in the background, you can definitely see that one ink has a much heavier application. So here it's nice and even, and then I move it just up and to the right a little bit more. I get a little bit of my texture paste, and I'm going to use a palette knife to pop it through. I really like the plastic palette knives. They're just much easier and a little bit more flexible than the metal ones, but whatever you have works fine. Even an old gift card or an old credit card, that will apply the texture paste perfectly. I'm just putting a nice smooth layer through there, and then I'm going to take my stencil off. I do want to go and wash this straight away because the texture paste will set like concrete, so you want to make sure that you don't leave it anywhere for too long. Now this is the version here where it's obviously wet. You do need to leave this to dry. You can dry it with a heat tool, but honestly it's quite tricky to avoid getting bubbles and all those sorts of things. So it is easier and it does dry pretty fast. So here are the 4 different versions of our stenciling. So as I said, I really wanted to keep it all very similar. It would have been easy to change up the colors and use different colors and use different stencils and things, but I wanted to make sure this was a really close comparison so that you can see. As I said, in the next video we are going to be turning these into cards, so make sure you join me for that one, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!